Thanks, thank you very much. Thank you. It's a lovely introduction. This bus I got from a scrapyard in Preston, and I did drive it all the way around the world, fueling it with nothing more than waste cooking oil. This is us in Death Valley. That's Christina, my partner, and that's me, Andy Pagg. I'm a journalist. I work as a freelance journalist. In the past, I've been an engineer and a filmmaker. And as a result of this expedition, I get called an environmentalist a lot. I'm really glad you didn't use that phrase, because I always feel very uncomfortable around that phrase. It somehow implies that I care about the environment a lot more than everyone else. And I live my life in a very, very environmental way. That's simply not true. This project, it didn't actually start out to prove anything. It was more an experiment, and it's one of a series of experiments to kind of test sustainable solutions and sustainable ideas and travel at the same time. And this trip kind of had its roots about 10, 15 years ago when I was organising vehicle-based expeditions across Africa. This is a trip through the Algerian Sahara Desert, another trip through the Cameroonian rainforests. And what's great about travelling overland is that you journey from your home. In small increments, you see how the world changes, how the geography changes, the people's culture changes, languages, faces, diets, but all in small steps. So you end up at the end of a 1-month road trip or an off-road trip, somewhere completely foreign, completely alien to you, and you have a sense of how you are connected to this foreign place and how where you're from links to it, and you have a sense of the size of the world and your place in it. So it's a very grounding experience, but obviously there's a bit of a hypocrisy, as you can probably tell from driving these big 4x4s, to see the world in a vehicle that arguably contributes to its destruction. And I'm not just talking about an environmental aspect. This is a photograph I took in Mali. These ladies from this village rely on these buses that come through to sell their produce, yams and whatever else they grow in the village. And I took this photo in 2005 when crude oil prices had hit $100 a barrel, unprecedentedly high. And as a result, fuel prices in Mali very, very high. Fewer people were able to afford the buses, fewer buses running. And as a result, these ladies had fewer people to sell their produce to. So seemingly a very indirect effect, but these ladies really feeling the pinch. And I was watching this scene, and it kind of occurred to me that really I had to start to take a moment to think about the ethics of what I was doing with these road trips, even if you don't buy the environmental argument. And by the way, if you don't, you really need to read a lot more. But there was certainly a question of how, if I wanted to carry on doing these journeys, I really had to think of a sustainable way to do it. So at this time, 2005, I'd heard about biodiesel. Sounds great. It's this fuel that's made from vegetable oil rather than crude oil, and using it recycles the carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere instead of adding new carbon dioxide. Fantastic. This sounds great. So I got in touch with a company in the UK that was making biodiesel. I said, look, I want to run an expedition, see if I can use your fuel to get all the way to Timbuktu. And they said, okay, fine, we'll give you some fuel. And better still, they were doing an experiment with a chocolate factory using their waste cocoa butter. And cocoa butter is an oil. It's a fat, but it's an oil. So you can turn it into biodiesel. And so they gave me 2,000 litres of essentially fuel made from waste chocolate, which is quite a lot of fuel, quite a lot to carry. So we had to have a truck. The truck, having done the trip to Timbuktu previously, I knew wouldn't make it all the way. So we also needed some 4x4s to complete the final 200 kilometres off-road over the sand dunes to Timbuktu. And the trip went very, very well, but for a few problems. The fuel froze in the filters as we went over the Pyrenees. It basically turned back into chocolate, effectively. Although not a very appealing chocolate. We hit unexpectedly cold temperatures, and we spent 2 days in the Pyrenees, freezing cold in our Sahara shorts, trying to figure out the problem. The other big problem we had is at the border. When you go through a border with 2,000 litres of fluid, they tend to want to know what it is. So we said, well, it's fuel. Oh, well, you've got to pay fuel duty. Oh, no, well, it's not really fuel, it's chocolate. Oh, well, you need some food importation documents. So basically, we spent 7 days in the Moroccan port of Tangier, another 3 days here in a border outpost in Mauritania, doing everything we could to try and avoid paying any kind of tax to get this fuel through. But eventually, we made it to Timbuktu. This is my driving partner, John Grimshaw, who is trying to look like a Tuareg there, but actually looking like an outpatient from the head injuries unit. So fantastic, we made it to Timbuktu using biodiesel. It hadn't been easy, but we'd done it. But the big problem really had been carrying all the fuel with you as you go, not terribly practical. And so my mind started thinking, well, in the UK you've got, or certainly across Europe, you've got a whole load of fast food restaurants, and they all have French fries and fryer oil that they throw out. I wonder if you can use their rubbish bins as an infrastructure to refuel a journey across Europe. So to put that to the test, I invited 10 teams to take part in an event I made up called the Greece to Greece Rally. I had to go from London to Athens, powered only by used cooking oil that they would have to somehow collect and filter and put into their diesel engine cars, which had been converted to run on used cooking oil. And so this is day one, setting off from London behind the Ace Cafe. What's great about this photograph is there's actually 5 people, plus the person taking it, 6 of us kind of gathered round, and we're all scratching our heads. This is real men in shed stuff. Because no one on day one had any clue how we were going to do this, how we get the oil out of the bin into the jerry can, filter it through a T-shirt or through filters or whatever. So we had no idea, and we were totally improvising and making it up as we went along. But 10 days later, we actually made it to Athens. This is, you can tell it's Greece because in the corner there's a temple. They've been working on it for 2,000 years, but that's Greek builders for you. And it was while I was doing this trip, as the sort of coming to the end of this trip, is somewhere in Macedonia or Albania, I forget, but there was a road sign that said Athens, something like 700 kilometers straight ahead. And I looked at the fuel gauge, I thought, we've got enough fuel, we're going to make it. I can't believe it, we're going to make it. And at the same time on the road sign, it said Istanbul, about the same distance off to the left. And I thought, well, we could make it to Istanbul, actually. And Istanbul's the border where Europe meets Asia, across the Bosphorus. And hey, maybe we could get to, well, you certainly get to Asia, so maybe we could go through it. Hey, maybe we could go all the way around the world. So the idea started to ferment, and I went back to the UK and started working on a vehicle, and I thought, not only do I want the fuel to be waste, but I see if I can make the vehicle that I travel in waste as well. So I found this in a scrapyard. I spent 4 months working on it, in fact almost 5, with the help of a lot of friends. We installed a fuel filtering system inside and a massive fuel tank as well, so if I couldn't find oil in one place, I'd have enough of a buffer to get through to the next place. Inside, we converted it into an eco-home. I hate the prefix eco because it really is meaningless, but basically turned it into a home using reclaimed materials, so the kind of minimal impact possible. And after 4 months of working on the truck, I set off for this 1-year trip around the world, which ended up taking 2 years. Now, if I can see a lot of excited faces, and I see you're planning this for your summer holiday, so I'm going to give you 3 tips if you want to try this. First of all, get yourself a really long hose. This is in New Mexico, filling up from a truck stop diner. And actually, this was quite easy to get to, but usually the bins from behind the diners are really hard to get to. So a nice long 10-meter hose, that will get you able to suck the fuel out. And these are the best stops, because over here you've got people paying for their fuel, and you're getting yours for free. So that's really, really satisfying. The next thing I would say is try and stay warm. Here, this is in the back street of Tehran, and I parked the bus, if you look, it's in the shade. And on the other side of the street, it's getting a load of sunlight. This is in November, so it's actually pretty cold. And what had happened over the course of about 4 or 5 days that the truck had been parked here, got progressively more and more cold, and the fuel froze again in the injectors and in the filters and in the fuel lines. And that's why I'm looking pretty disappointed. So thankfully, the Iranian government had just had a clampdown on satellite dishes, illegal satellite dishes, and I was able to find a satellite dish in the street and got some charcoal. And if you look back at this photo, actually underneath the truck there, you'll see is the barbecue that is slowly roasting the engine to defrost the fuel lines. And after about half an hour, watch the fuel gauge get warmer and warmer and warmer. And actually what I'm really worrying about here is whether my truck is about to catch fire. But then it started up. So the final tip I would tell you is don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. This is in Baluchistan, which is the southern corridor of Pakistan, very close to the Afghan border. And so it's a pretty dangerous place to be, and I was given a military escort, a lovely fella. And what I realized on this trip again and again is that all the places I went to where I thought, for sure I'm going to get strung up from a lamppost here, that's where I encountered the friendliest and warmest people. And it's really an equation. I mean, it happened without exception every time. And the world is full of really, really nice people, which came as a big surprise to me because I'm originally from Croydon. And every success of the trip really came down to the people I met along the way saying, yes, I'm going to help you, and going out of their way to do something unexpectedly helpful. And the trip was a success, I think, really, in fairness. I mean, I'm slightly biased, I guess, when I say that. If you wanted to criticize it, you could say, oh, well, you had to put your truck on a container ship, and that wasn't running on used cooking oil. You could also say that because I've had a lot of criticisms about the trip. You could also say, in total, over the 2 years and 30,000 kilometers, I used about 20 liters of diesel to clean filters and clean injector lines and stuff like that. So, but actually all the road-going miles were all done on either used cooking oil or biodiesel made from used cooking oil. So in that sense, it was a success. This is an aerial shot of Tehran. It's a massive city. You can see the smoke haze, the smog, the inversion layer on the side of the photo. And seeing Tehran and seeing lots of other cities this size and scale, though, made me realize that actually using used cooking oil, it was great for my journey, and I was able to do it, but it's not a scalable solution. We're not going to solve the world's energy problems with used cooking oil. It's a great thing to do with waste cooking oil, to recycle it in this way, but it's not really a kind of global solution. Making biodiesel with agro crops also has a load of problems which haven't been figured out yet. So a kind of mixed success in that sense. But then I realized that actually there was another part of the trip that had been a success, which was living in a truck, which is something I still do for part of the year. Basically, it's quite a small space, so I don't consume stuff. I don't have any space to put things, so I don't really buy anything. I generate all my own electricity and warm water from panels on the roof. I eat local food, which hasn't been transported particularly far or refrigerated. And I have a composting toilet, so even my poo gets recycled. Very green. And this was a kind of surprise kind of sustainable aspect of the trip that I hadn't been expecting. And I was watching, this is a scene in India, this village of nomads. I was watching how they were living, and I think, wow, this is great. Look, they're cooking their food on charcoal, on wood, which is a biofuel. It recycles the carbon dioxide already in the atmosphere. They make their living from donkeys who eat food scraps, energy from waste, effectively. Their homes certainly made from reclaimed materials. If only everybody lived like this, we'd have a really sustainable planet. And then I thought, well, actually, that doesn't make sense. The reason we're trying to find sustainable solutions is so that people don't end up living like this, forced to migrate from rising water levels, rising sea levels, or forced to migrate through failing crop yields that come about through unpredictable weather patterns. And really, in that realization, I've come to sort of have a better understanding of the definition of what an environmentalist is, I think, and it's something that gets lost a lot in common use. But I think now an environmentalist is someone who thinks that your standards of living are more threatened by continuing to use energy and resources in an unsustainable way, as opposed to someone who thinks that living standards are most threatened by restricting access to resources and energy. And so in that aspect, I guess it is fair to call me an environmentalist. But this trip and the kindness of people that I met along the way also taught me that actually human well-being, which is really what we're talking about, how do we manage the resources we have on this planet and the consequences of using those to provide the best well-being for everybody on it. The kindness of people I met along the way really taught me that human well-being is about a lot more than living standards. It's really about, in fact, some of the things that other people have already touched on in this morning. It's really about connection with other people and community. So if I go too far down that road, I run the risk of being called something far worse than environmentalist, and that's the phrase hippie, heaven forbid. But if you're interested to read more about my journey and about being a hippie, then my website is biotruckexpedition.org. Thank you very much.